Hello there. I'm delighted to be able to take part in this conference, particularly because I'm actually originally from Scotland, although you can't tell that from my accent. I was born in Aberdeen, actually, in 1970, and I only lived there for a few years, and my family moved down to England, which is where I grew up, and later on I spent a brief time in America and returned to London, and then from there moved to Ireland. And I'm about almost half my life living in Ireland now, which is where I live at the moment. And probably will continue living there the rest of my life, more than likely. But anyway, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Ireland and also for Scotland. And I haven't been back very much, so this conference has been an opportunity for me to actually come back for the first time in about 10-15 years since I was last in Glasgow, or in Scotland at all for that matter. So anyway, enough about me. What I'm here for is to talk about the Fellowship of Isis, and in particular Lady Olivia Robertson, who is one of the three founders, and about her experience and about her life, really, I suppose, and in particular a focus on the oracles that are part of the liturgy of the Fellowship of Isis. Now, you can find a lot of information online about her and about the founders, particularly from the Fellowship of Isis' own website. So I'm not going to go on at length about the history of the Fellowship because that's easy enough to find. So what I will do is allow you to watch a short video. Offer rather than allow would be a better word of saying it, in her own words, in Olivia's own words, which who better to give her an introduction to what it's about. So, of course, all three have died, and she was the last of the three. Her brother's wife, and Olivia herself set it up together, and subsequently some other organisations were set up, including the Druid Clonegal, which is my sort of division, if you like, within the Fellowship of Isis, because Druidism is the path that I follow, and it's in that order that I was initiated by Olivia in 2009, where I met her about 6 years earlier. I think it was 2002 or 2003 that I first met her. And I was a long time in getting to know her, really, although I saw her frequently. It took a little while before I got the opportunity to actually speak to her at any length and get to know her. And I can remember her asking me about my life, and she didn't mention anything about why, but subsequent to discussing my own experiences and my own training, she actually offered to initiate me within the Fellowship of Isis through the Clonegal. And I received this certificate in the post, which she illustrated herself by hand, which was one of my treasured possessions I have that came from her, because each one is unique in that she would illustrate them all. Everybody who was initiated by her would have one of these, and they're very special. I'm also very pleased to have a couple of her pictures, which were given to members at the 40th anniversary of the beginning of the Fellowship of Isis, which was celebrated at Huntington Castle in Clonegal, which is in sort of the eastern half of Ireland in County Carlow. Here's the second picture received. So, and she, apart from her spiritual work, she was an accomplished, rather unconventional artist. She'd sometimes use sort of domestics of paint for the wall, as well as the, acrylics and things like that. And a lot of our work has a spiritual theme. In fact, most of it, you'd say. So, and also one other item I have, which I'm actually wearing, is this scarf, which belonged to her, which is, I find, is something when I want to sort of attune to her. I find that quite helpful to wear this. She had a number of these such scarves, which again were given to people at the 40th anniversary. And yeah, I'm delighted to have this. So anyway, I'll let you watch that little video now.
You may now want to know something about the Fellowship of Isis. It was founded in 1976 by my brother, his wife Pamela, and myself, and this is, to this date, I don't know when you'll be listening, is 1991, and now we have over 10,500 members in 69 countries, and people want to know, how do we manage this? The answer is simple. We are all in rapport in the inner planes. There's a rainbow circulation of light and friendliness between all our countries. So it doesn't matter what religion you belong to. We have people who are Catholics, Protestants, you heard here, Buddhist, Hindu, every type of tradition, united. Now some people may say, isn't this eclectic? The answer is yes. But we only have this blending when there's something we all share in common. For instance, we all share the sun in common. And above all, the balancing power of the feminine. Why we emphasize the feminine? It's been so rejected, well, really neglected. The overemphasis on patriarchy, male qualities, has led to the state our earth is in today. So this misplaced contempt for all qualities of the feminine has caused, I believe, most of our troubles on the earth. Because not only is the earthly qualities of the goddess despised, but her psychic powers. So we believe in developing the psychic powers as well.
So, if you've never seen anything of Olivia before, you would now recognize the sound of her voice. She was already of an advanced age when I met her, but listening to her talk and the way that she spoke, you wouldn't have thought she was a woman who was in her 80s. And that when she died, she was in her 90s. So I knew her for a period of 10 years. And you could say she was somewhat eccentric. The first time I met her, I was sort of invited along by a couple who were members. And I had joined the Druid Grove that they were running. So I was not really knowing what to expect. There were lots of people dressed up in esoteric outfits, some with staffs and drums and wands. I've never been very much into that, so I felt a little bit sort of out of place, I suppose, in a way. Although at this point I was not a member of the priesthood. I was a lay person, if you like, invited by from the priesthood. So I was very interested in the format, which has changed from what it was then, but at the time there would be sort of a gathering of people, and what would happen is you would get a cup of tea before, or and also after, down in the local pub. But beforehand, people would have a cup of tea up at the theatre, and then the sort of the proceedings would start. Olivia would gather everyone together, and there would be a sort of play, a mystery play, if you like, which Olivia would just make it up on the spot on what it was going to be about. She picked the subject matter, and she would pick people from the priesthood and the congregation to take part, and very few people would say no to her. So it ended up that there'd be various people playing the gods. There would be the good guys and the bad guys, and usually the play would revolve around some kind of nefarious plan that evil people had thought up. And this play would unfold sort of pretty much unscripted, pretty randomly, with the gods giving commentary on the events that were happening. So at various points in my attendance, I would have played the good guys, the bad guys, and one of the gods as well. So she'd put you on the spot sometimes. And another thing that would happen at the end of this would be a spiral dance where everyone would join hands. Sometimes there'd be so many people there that you could barely manage to do it. The place would be absolutely rammed, and this sort of huge snaking procession would happen. And then eventually going out of the door of the theatre off down towards the grove. And we would end up then at the ruined chapel. At each of these places there would be some ceremonial happenings. And then finally we would arrive at the back door of the castle, the entrance to what was once upon a time a dungeon, that is now the Temple of Isis, guarded by the statue of Persephone. Someone would request entry, and following that, knocking on the door, we would all enter, and a sort of chime, a gong would be rung inside, and we would all process through to the area where the ritual proper started, which would be at the well, Bridget's well, which seemingly predates the castle. Along with that, there's also a very ancient balloon stone on the grounds of the castle, and also supposedly a meteorite. Where exactly that is, I don't know. I don't know where the balloon stone is. It's still there now today. But anyway, this well is dedicated to Bridget, and the water is always used. In fact, Olivia famously fell into the well once and was fished out. So she got a baptism in Bridget's holy water, you could say. So we all laughed about that. Eventually what happened was a cover was put on top of it to prevent such things happening in the future. A wooden cover with a lid. But she would laugh about that, and we all had a good laugh about her falling in. No harm was done. Nobody drowned. She wasn't injured. So it became a bit of a joke in the end. Anyway, from there we would then go into the main area where the altar to Isis is. And dotted around the temple in the little side rooms, you'll find other altars to different goddesses. One should be clear, really, that although the fellowship is primarily dedicated to Isis, it also encompasses many different goddesses. And of course, Olivia was very clear to make it known that she recognized the divine masculine as well. Of course, her focus was on the divine feminine, as she explained, the reason being because it had been suppressed and forgotten for so long. But Olivia was very much one for balance. She realized the folly of patriarchy, and I think she was well aware of the folly of matriarchy as well. In order for humanity to be healthy, balance is required, which should mean equality and cooperation and love and respect between all peoples, including between men and women. That was something she very much believed in, and she was very keen to have men involved in the fellowship as well as women. But there's one part of the ceremonies and rituals which men were always excluded from and still are to this day, and that is the performing of the oracle. So the way this worked was that a priestess would be selected, and while everybody was out doing the play, visiting the grove and visiting the ruined chapel, the priestess would prepare herself. She would sit in the chair on the right-hand side of the altar, and she would have a veil over her head, supposedly to put her into darkness, and she would meditate and prepare herself for the oracle to speak through her. So while the preliminaries are going on, the blessing of people with the bridges of water and invocations of gods and goddesses, this priestess would be in preparation to give the oracle. So that would be one of the first parts of the rituals at the altar, would be the giving of the oracle. And people would listen very intensely. This would generally, in later days, not be done by Olivia herself, although she would have given many oracles in earlier times. And if you look on the YouTube page for the Fellowship of Isis, you'll find several of those. So I'm going to present one of them, which is an oracle of Isis. This one is fairly clear. Some of the recordings aren't great, either because they're too far away or because of Olivia's penchant for playing very loud classical music. So quite often what would happen is we would all process from the little British chapel round to the main altar, and she would turn up this rousing classical music very loudly. And then what would often happen would be very surreptitiously someone would turn it down bit by bit, not to be disrespectful, but because you couldn't hear her, because she wasn't aware of the fact that the music would drown out her voice, because she was quite deaf. She wanted the music played loudly. But the trouble was, you would not be able to hear the oracle properly, or her thoughts. Again, after the oracle, she would give her interpretation of what has been said, and ask other people to comment too. But then a journey would often be given afterwards, a sort of a shamanic journey of sorts, and very often it would be Olivia herself that would deliver that. Not always, but generally it would be her. Again, with the very loud music, that could be quite difficult. So there was a tendency of people to try to turn it down. So if you do listen to some of the oracles and some of the recordings, you will often hear the classical music quite often, and very often it was too loud, which was a little bit off-putting. But I'm grateful to say on many occasions it was turned down quite a bit so that people could actually hear what she was saying. Rather cheeky, I know, but it was necessary. People loved to go and listen to her in particular. Of course, there were a number of priests and priestesses who were involved in the ceremony at the temple, but it was primarily Olivia that people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear her wisdom, her thoughts, her long experience of life and of people. Olivia seemed quite innocuous, quite sort of, I suppose, away with the fairies to many people, but actually she was a very wise person. There were no flies on her, She did know what was going on. She was easygoing, but she didn't take any nonsense off people. And she was a good judge of character. She could read people very well. She was aware when people were there for their own interests and their own ego. She was able to read people's auras pretty well. So she could tell what people's intentions were, and she would not take any prisoners, so to speak, in dealing with people who she thought were inappropriate. And she would, on occasion, disinvite people. And, she would rather apologetically say, "I'm afraid your invitation to the castle has been withdrawn," or something of that nature, and ask them to leave. And people did. She had great gravitas and authority. And, she was a very kind person, but if she felt that people were inappropriate or there in bad faith, she would deal with them. And very effectively too, I might add. But Olivia was a very fair person, and she was interested in everyone, not just the priesthood. She would ask people at the end of the journey what experiences they had, and she didn't care whether you were in the priesthood or if you were just a lay person. She was just as interested to hear what your impressions or your experiences were. And indeed, after the whole thing was finished up, with thanking and closing, thanking the gods and goddesses for having been present and bidding them goodbye. There would be some final notices, and she would invite everyone down to take tea in Osborne's pub and have cakes and sandwiches, which was a lovely tradition that carried on for years and years. But often down at the pub, she would sit in a particular place, but anybody could go and talk to her. She didn't have airs and graces. She wasn't an egotist. She would speak to anybody, and she was interested in what people had to say, far more than in talking herself. She would speak with gravitas when she felt it was appropriate, but she was very often more interested in listening to what other people had to say. She was well aware of her own thoughts and her own opinions, and amazingly, for someone who had become very famous at this point, and sort of a leader of what an organisation that had swollen to 25,000 people by the time of her death, she was still very interested in other people's lives and their experiences and their thoughts on both spirituality and life in general, which was a real credit to her. But anyway, now I'm going to give you another chance to have a listen to her own words. This is the liturgy of Isis, the oracle of Isis, and from the liturgy that was written by Gary, her brother Lawrence, I should say, and herself. So nowadays, these are often read out at the well, the oracular visions that were recorded by Olivia. And of course, we still have the oracles at the altar, but these are all obviously ad hoc, and these are not recorded or taped or anything of that nature. They're just given and listened to by whoever's in attendance. So somewhat different from the liturgical oracles, which again, as I said, you'll find more of them on YouTube. So anyway, here is Olivia.
Do not belittle even the smallest effort, the shortest prayer. For the deathless deities magnify every brave effort towards goodness. The humblest gift offered with a loving heart to me is sent forth 1,000-fold, as the light of one small candle can reflect itself through mirrors to infinity. One little seed may create a mighty life circle on a great planet, and the life of a long-dead sun can enrapture the soul of those who can still see it through the cycles of time and place. The secret of the spiral is that you may extend your spirit through the law of octaves. As one bass note of music can repeat itself higher and higher, so can your own soul travel through the spheres by understanding this cosmic key. Do not believe a teacher who knows everything. In verity, this is ignorance. Rather believe a teacher who tells you that you are both at the beginning, for this is truth. At first, humanity was given the ladder of authority, with deities on the topmost rung, then masters, followed by a hierarchy of descent and ending with what were called the lower orders. And this sufficed for those learning the ways of the intellect. But now you are given the spiral, which extends into infinity, yet can be worn on your finger as a ring, for the ring itself has its psychic, spiritual, and divine being. So travel the spiral path of the Adepti, which goes both up and down, right hand and left hand, greater and smaller, as great as the cosmic goddess, and as small as your own divine spark.
One of the things about Olivia was she was a very compassionate person. She was very understanding. She had, I suppose you could say, in some ways limited life experience, in that she had never been married, and she claimed that she'd never had a relationship of a sort of romantic nature. But she had, in her later life, travelled a great deal. Of course, as a young woman, she'd written very successful books, which are now largely forgotten. And she'd also taught up in Dublin small children. And of course, she would have been familiar with her own family members, her nieces and nephews. So, although she lived alone within a section of the castle, she was very much involved in the family life, and from having met many of her family members, they all have fantastic memories of her. Found her to be great fun when they were children, and also very kind and compassionate and generous. And I'd say that's most people's experience of her. Very generous with her time, and very, very, very warm, and very insightful. So one more clip that I'm going to present to you in a minute. But she would often have something very pithy or succinct to say. She didn't riffle on for hours and hours in the way that some people do. She would say what she had to say fairly quickly. I can remember her advising a particular person who was having a difficult time in their life and not very happy. And one of the things she said, "Oh well, do you have enough money? Do you have enough to eat? Are you warm enough?" And the answer to all these questions was no. And she says, "Well, how could you expect to be in good form if the basics of your life are in disarray? Of course you'd be unhappy. To move on to sort of more spiritual matters, you need to take care of the basics of her life," she believed. And that seemed like great advice, that if your actual day-to-day life is in turmoil and a terrible struggle, it's very, very difficult to concentrate on higher matters. So, this advice was actually given, I heard it secondhand from the person who'd been advised that. But, that was typical of how she would be. She would just say something only once. She wouldn't reiterate it time and time again, which is something that many people do, something that I sometimes do myself. Well, I think she was very aware of evil in the world, and aware of the negative effects of it. But she was also aware of transmutation, of the ability to take negative things and transform them into something positive, and also the often unexpected benefits of negative experiences, and sometimes good coming out of evil in the long run. So people may have thought she was sort of airy-fairy and, sort of very new age, but actually she had a very deep understanding of esoterica. She obviously understood the Egyptian mysteries very well. And as I mentioned earlier about her attitude towards men being positive rather than sort of very negative, she was well aware of the creation myth of the Egyptians, of the fact that Ra, in its original form, was neither male or female, but embodied both energies. The creation of the universe, the creation of the gods, the creation of mankind subsequently in that sort of legend or in this original mythology. Ra embodies both energies, and she very much felt a need for balance in the world, the balance between light and dark, the balance between men and women, in order for the world to function properly as it should, in order for us to be in a position where we may work on our higher selves to become closer to the gods. That's so much easier when you are in a state of balance. And on a larger scale for all of humanity, if we achieve a state of balance instead of living in chaos, that process becomes that much more easy to facilitate. And she really did make it her life's work to spread a message of love and hope and peace and compassion and understanding, even for people who've done evil things. And she was a very deeply compassionate woman. Anyway, there's a short video here of her. It's not even a minute, but quite insightful nonetheless.
Be happy now. Don't worry about whether you were happy yesterday or whether you will be tomorrow, but eternity is between seconds. You find deity, the goddess, the god, now. And your home becomes your sanctuary. You have a sanctuary as your hearth, a candle, one candle, a stick of incense. Wherever you are is heaven. That's what my message is. Yes, wherever you are should be heaven.
So, as some of you may know, Olivia passed away in 2013. She unfortunately broke her leg and had to go to hospital, and as she was recovering from that, unfortunately she had a stroke which led to her death. I was fortunate to be able to visit her on many occasions, not just in hospital but before at the castle. She would make tea and you could sit and talk for quite some time with her, which was always an honour and a pleasure, I have to say. But I remember visiting her in Gorey, in County Wexford, at the hospital where she was. If it was a nice day, she would be very keen to get outside. So she unfortunately had to sit in a chair, but we would take her outside to see, a bit of nature and enjoy the sun. But she was very, very interested to ensure the legacy of both herself and the other founders. And she had various plans to be enacted afterwards. And her original successor, unfortunately, was already a very elderly woman too, so there were some changes in her original plans. Pat Griffin subsequently died, but she was already of advanced age when Olivia passed. So her niece, Cresta Pryor, is the current leader, and her this will then be passed on to another family member. More than likely that would be Olivia's great niece. But if she's willing to take on the role, that is, time will tell. But she wanted the work to continue. And it does, although there has been something of a bit of a schism following her death, which is something that's very regrettable, but not entirely unsurprising. Within any kind of order or sort of spiritual organizations, there can be, heads butting up against each other egos, and disagreements. But one can only hope that in the long run, these can all be ironed out and the fellowship will be as one, united in its purpose of spreading the energy of the divine feminine. And that is something that's obviously continuing as there are new people, new priesthood entering and becoming trained in a more formalized way, which was something that Olivia recognized would be of great value going forward. But when I joined, I was not actually trained within the Fellowship of Isis. I had done my training elsewhere through OBOD to a large extent and others. But now there was an actual training program to be a priest or priestess. And the initiates pick a goddess who they will be a devotee of going forward, I would imagine, for the rest of their life. And the training is undertaken in one of the lyceums. So, although it's a tremendous loss to have lost the three founders, and particularly Olivia, it was an inevitable part of the journey of the Fellowship of Isis. It was almost inevitable it would become something of a crisis with someone who was so vibrant, so powerful, so symbolic of the organization and its values. It would, of course, cause something of a hiccup. We are now 10 years down the road from her death, and she is very fondly remembered. But of course, the fellowship will change. Change is an inevitable part of life. The whole universe is constantly changing, either very rapidly or very, very slowly in some cases. But change is inevitable. And of course, it is changing within the fellowship. But what I think she would have hoped would be that we would retain the initial values and the initial mission of the Fellowship of Isis, with a view to bringing about a state of balance where the energies of the feminine stand alongside in equality with those of the masculine, and diluting the obviously very apparent negative effects of a world that's being dominated by masculine spirituality for a very long time. It's clear to most people that in the earlier days of human religion and spirituality, things would have been quite different. And we've had a period of several thousand years of the male domination. Although within her lifetime, we have now seen that change. When Olivia first began this, you still had a very patriarchal, male-dominated religion, Roman Catholicism, that was established in Ireland, where she lived nearly all of her life. By the time that she died, the church was in absolute crisis, and huge numbers of people had defected, if you like, from Roman Catholicism to something a bit more modern and archaic at the same time. You could say a more holistic worldview. I think basically that is the core of what she wanted, was not to eliminate masculinity, but to bring together two halves as a whole, because humanity is basically divided in half between men and women, and what has been our success, our survival over all these hundreds of thousands of years has been our ability to work together, to cooperate with each other. And of course, we've been through eons of conflict and war and death and disaster, but on the same token, when humanity works together, that we can achieve amazing things. And that was really what she looked to. Olivia was very positive. She liked to see the best in people. She really believed in the potential of human beings to rise above all the death and decay and disaster and all the bad traits that many of us have. And I think when people were around her, it actually would rub off on people. They would feel inspired by her, just by being her presence. So you could say that she really had a very special role within the fellowship itself and in sort of humanity's journey towards a sort of kinder, more egalitarian, more equal world. And although she's sorely missed, her legacy is still here, and it will be on. Will live on forever. Not just in the videos that you can find in recordings of her, but within the work of the fellowship itself as it continues into the future. Thank you for listening, and if you want to find out more about the Fellowship of Isis, you will find them on fellowshipofisis.com. Thank you for listening.